Okay. Our next speaker is Doreen Hudson, who is the Assistant Laboratory Director of the Los Angeles Police Department Criminalistics Laboratory, and she manages the trace, firearms, and field investigation units. She has 32 years experience in, and having testified in hundreds of cases and investigated hundreds of crime scenes. And her presentation is entitled Successes of the Generalist at the Crime Scenes, Keeping Trace Evidence Valuable.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I think we're hearing this through a number of the speakers and those of you who've been making comments at the microphone, the importance of really fostering the future of trace evidence. I heard Carrie talk about outreach and the importance of really selling your product being the quality trace evidence work that you're doing. I think that's critical to our future. As a laboratory manager, I'm very focused on the field of trace evidence. I spent 8 years in that discipline about 16 years ago. So I'm so happy to see the distance traveled and the time that I've been detoured into the firearm analysis field. But I'm thrilled for your successes here. I do think it's important that you educate not only your customers about your service, but also your leadership. And I don't just mean your crime lab managers, I mean your leadership in your organizations that you serve, your commanding officers, your chiefs of police, the organizations that are going to fund and support and help to foster this future that's so important. Also, I think Faye did a great job kind of raising some of the important issues that we're confronting, starting at the very beginning, beginning with the end in mind. That's something the LAPD decided to embrace a couple of years ago when we were using a different method for approach to crime scenes. 2 years ago at the last Trace Evidence Symposium, my boss, Greg Matheson, was here and talked about a project we were going to launch by putting a generalist at the crime scene and improving the quality and integrity of our physical evidence. I was the assistant lab director put in charge of seeing that through, and that's what I'm going to speak about today, as well as this future of trace evidence and how to keep it viable using the models we've adopted in the LAPD. And we are a municipal laboratory. That's given us the flexibility, not always the funding that we'd like, but certainly the flexibility to try things out and see if we can raise the bar, change the way we're doing business. So we did begin with the end in mind at the crime scene. We put generalists in crime scenes in order to do much of the specific work that Faye detailed in her presentation. Also partnering with professional colleagues to foster a more robust trace unit, not only for us, but for our partners in forensic science. So I'll be talking to you about our collaboration with other trace experts in the Sheriff's Department, as well as the California State University system and so forth. So I talked about educating customers. That's a key part of our field investigation unit, where we launched this with the intent to improve the quality of service we were delivering, get our customers educated while we're delivering it, and to educate one another. We really didn't have the ability to immediately deploy this group of generalists into our field investigation unit. So we drew specialists from the different units of our existing crime lab and believed that their own internal collaboration within our field investigation unit would help through conversation, discussion, collaboration, working crime scenes together, and some osmosis, create this generalism that we needed to institute in relatively short order. We thought it was important to raise the bar for our crime scene investigations and to make a point about collecting samples in order to totally represent the crime scene. I heard a comment earlier about collecting the road debris surrounding a vehicular investigation to make sure that the background for what other paint chips might be present would be collected. What police investigator would think about collecting, the background contamination within a crime scene? There's none. So we all value and understand the importance of being able to deploy a criminalist at a crime scene. But we weren't always this enlightened at the LAPD. We had a history that was quite different from that. We used to spread our crime scene investigation duties throughout the lab. The participation was kind of on a rotational basis. All of the criminalists working in the crime lab were expected to participate in this activity, and it was secondary to their primary assignment. So we didn't always have consistency with our results. We saw a lot of variability, and we weren't really satisfied with our end product. We wanted our generalists to be diverse enough to be able to have reverence for the evidence that we had out there, to make the best choices for some of the irreversible decision-making that goes on out at crime scenes, and not to just apply techniques, but actually analyze the scene components in order to best sample the evidence that's out there. So we consider those individuals who actually go out and analyze the scene for its total picture, not just for the individual techniques that might be applied at the scene. It was our decision to go ahead and centralize this function of crime scene investigation, to actually specialize by creating these generalists to have this broad understanding of the different disciplines within criminalistics and how to best exercise their judgment at those scenes. We were able to increase clue value to our detectives, and these clues were now factually based. They weren't the kind of clues that come from informants who have something to gain by giving information to the police, but actual fact-based clues. We increased the productivity, not only in the work that we're doing, but also by decreasing the distraction in the other laboratory units that had the interruption of unanticipated, unplanned work activities, such as crime scenes that would disrupt either their daytime or nighttime activities. So it improved the lab morale. There was no longer this variability within the individual's work shift as to whether or not they'd be interrupted from their narcotics analysis plan for the day and be shuffled out into a field investigation where they felt ill-prepared and uncomfortable in that role. So we began in July of 2007 with our field investigation unit. We've been in process now for a couple of years. We average about 350 field investigations per year, with a relatively small contingent of criminalists. We'll talk about the staffing when we actually get into the discussion of trace and the distribution of scientists throughout our laboratory. We actually sought a lot of feedback from our customers. We asked detectives, prosecutors, laboratory employees constantly for input onto how to improve our process, what adjustments we should make in order to improve the quality of service and make it more competent than when we began. In this process, we had to implement a lot of changes and add people. We actually added a crime scene surveyor to the unit. We added an additional laboratory technician. We had to replace 2 pregnant criminalists with replacement generalists. So we faced a lot of the kind of challenges that you have to deal with in your laboratories as well in order to keep this as a functioning, viable entity of our organization. We added a forensic surveyor to our field investigation unit whose responsibility it was to do the diagramming and to focus on all the metrics within the crime scene so that our generalists could remain focused on that scientific approach to extracting, identifying, and recovering the important physical evidence. No more bag and tag and get out of there. We've had an opportunity to see not a completion, but we're working well towards our way of accrediting that unit. We are in an ASCLD lab, legacy accredited crime lab. However, we are not currently accredited in crime scene investigation. We're up to about 3/4 completion on our laboratory manuals. We operate a quality system. We do proficiency testing. We do competency testing within our field unit, but we are not yet added as a discipline that is accredited through the legacy program. In this process, as much success as we've had, we're also seeing a backlog develop during this past year. But the backlog is not in the execution of the work, but rather in the technical and administrative review of our case packages. So that's where our backlog remains. So as we've evaluated and had an opportunity to get a lot of feedback from our end users, as well as our own leadership within the Los Angeles Police Department, the chiefs of police, our command staff, we've gotten a resounding affirmation of the program. We've seen an improvement in our own laboratory morale, the enthusiasm, and the efforts toward crime scene investigation. One of the things we were faced with when we implemented this program a couple of years ago was a resistance within our organization to take criminalists off the bench doing what was considered important casework in order to put them out into crime scenes. Well, at that time, we were organized under a technical support function of the police department. About a year ago, the crime lab was reorganized under the Detective Bureau, under a different philosophical outlook, you might say. And although we were prepared to articulate a defense for what value there was in taking these individuals out of case-producing units and putting them into this generalist crime scene investigation group, the entire need for the argument completely went away because the detectives fully understood the importance of a quality crime scene investigation far over and above 10 more cases per month produced by the narcotics or alcohol analysis unit. So we were totally prepared for a very long discussion over this, and we didn't have to give it. But that leads into this foundation of fostering a future for trace evidence, keeping it viable in the future. Part of that process is selling, it's marketing. It's marketing at the crime scene, it's marketing to your leadership. But it also falls under this second prong I mentioned at the beginning, and that is collaboration and partnering. We are in a unique opportunity to partner with several investigative agencies in the Los Angeles area, and most specifically the LA County Sheriff's Department and the LA Police Department moved into a joint facility on a university campus where we have a master's program in criminalistics. We have a presence for California Criminalistics Institute. There's a lot of sharing going on. And while we clearly didn't invent the concept of sharing, we're taking full advantage of it in the LAPD by capitalizing on all this expertise and all this knowledge, all this opportunity in one place. Our lab is set up in a way that we have a total of 192 staff members, and 178 of them are actually criminalists or technicians working in the laboratory. So you can see as you look at the way it breaks down across our laboratory, the trace unit represents about 4.5% of the technical laboratory staff. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department has similarly staffed, although I don't know if it's the same representative percentage. It is certainly not our largest unit, but we actually drew personnel from that unit in order to staff our crime scene investigation unit. In September of 2007, we moved into this new facility that I made mention of. The Sheriff's Department moved in their major case units. They did not move in their entire laboratory. They put in their firearms, trace, DNA, and chemical processing units of their laboratory. The LAPD, by contrast, moved their entire laboratory operation, which included then solid dose narcotics, toxicology, everything. I think that's about and question documents. So we moved our entire laboratory operation into that venue. We're really learning as we go. While I tell you that we moved there in 2007, that whole first year was really just settling in time. We're just starting to see some equipment arrive that was ordered, at the time of the move, so it's really been a process of adjustment and settling in. I think we're going to really reap the rewards and benefits in the next few years to come. Both the LA Sheriff's Department and the LAPD are ASCLD Lab Legacy accredited organizations. We have exclusivity as it pertains to evidence control in order to meet the requirements of accreditation. But there's a lot of shared areas, showing you some examples here in this particular slide. In a room like this, our impression laboratory, even though it's a shared area available to both LASD and LAPD personnel, we take measures to safeguard evidence if it's not in immediate attendance of the examiner or analyst. The instruments you see listed here in green lettering are actually instruments belonging to the LA County Sheriff's Department. The blue instrument is an LAPD instrument. These are some expensive instruments that maybe either one of us individually couldn't afford to necessarily have, but planning this out and selecting instrumentation to purchase as individual organizations and making them available to share between us has enabled us to have access to more instrumentation than we would have had as individually operating laboratories in separate facilities. So the convenience of being co-located allows us this kind of flexibility. We've taken advantage of some training from the vendors of these instruments so that when vendors provide the training on the instrument, both LAPD and LA Sheriffs are in attendance for the training. And I'm going to remind you that we've only been at this a short time. We expect to see progress in the trace unit specifically as time rolls by, because this co-location of the crime labs spans more than one unit. There are other units, such as the firearms unit and the DNA unit, that are more aggressively moving forward with training opportunities that are being shared between the organizations. And I'm sure this is going to spill over shortly into the trace arena, where we're already in discussion with the sheriffs about bringing in some explosives trainer to the location in order to present explosives training to both of our agencies. In the case of reference collections, neither of the two units, LA Sheriffs or PD, really felt that their resources were adequate before this big move. Now they feel they have competent reference collections, a great conference room, and the proper surroundings to foster the future of trace evidence. The Sheriff's Department doesn't have a Sidecar database. The LAPD does. And where we don't feel we have a need to duplicate, we actually don't. We go ahead and just keep it specific to one particular organization, but when the need arises, we make it available to that other agency. And so, of course, the sheriffs represent a much larger area than the municipal region of Los Angeles, so any of their contracting agencies have access to then the LAPD's resource. In one recent case, the Sheriff's Department asked us to use Sidecar to help them identify a footwear impression from a sexual assault of a 90-year-old victim in a case that's under investigation right now. And our Sidecar, which is located within our specific area of LAPD, was used to benefit their investigation. I think it's important to note, because there would always be concern, that neither of the laboratories really lost their autonomy. High-use instruments like this FTIR are actually located in agency-specific areas, such as the one you see here. The police department and the sheriff's department each have their own respective arson laboratories. I've shown pictures along the way of some of the room designators, and wherever you see PD or SD, it specifically denotes an area where access cards are only allowable to that agency. If there's no such designator, such as the SEM room, then there's no designator, and it's a shared area of the laboratory. Specifically in our SEM room, it is a shared area, but the reagent prep rooms, which feed off of this particular room, are actually separate and distinct. You'll see that, I wonder if there's anywhere else in a forensic lab where there are 3 SEMs. If there are, I'd like to hear about it. They've got, oh, okay. We have, the sheriffs have an old one, which they're using for non-GSR cases presently. Their brand new one, which they're doing GSR cases. And then the LAPD has their dedicated SEM, which is used exclusively for GSR. This week, the Sheriff's Lab are actually doing a bloodstain pattern interpretation at our request, because we don't have a bloodstain pattern analyst or tech reviewer at the time. On the right, we're bringing up a melting point apparatus online, which the sheriffs have expressed some interest in using in an upcoming case of theirs. So while we have some agency-specific either expertise or equipment, and it's in the agency-specific region, we're making it available to one another and really dissolving the boundary lines between us. And also that sharing goes beyond just the LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Department. Because we have the presence of the California Criminalistics Institute, because we have the presence of the California Forensic Science Institute and the California State University campus, we're seeing opportunities developing month by month in order to share and prosper from each other's resources. We've had a little bit of CCI training as it overlapped into our trace unit. A lot of the CCI classes that have been presented so far have been specific to other disciplines of criminalistics aside from our trace evidence unit. The relationship between us is very healthy. We have a no poaching policy. We have a no expert shopping policy, and we're very respectful of those boundaries. It's working really well for us. We do ask each other for help, and we're glad to help each other when needed, but we're not listening to requests from our customers directly. We're redirecting them through their own laboratory and asking that that laboratory ask for assistance. As our caseload levels increase and our staffing levels of trained examiners kind of fluctuate, I heard Faye say that they were declining daily. Ours are just kind of fluctuating, I'd have to say. This shared experience, I think, holds a lot of promise for trace evidence in particular. I feel like we're really just scratching the surface of this opportunity, but I sure see it as a very once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a person with a 32-year career to see this as the potential for a lot of success in order to sustain what we've been planning for. And the success that we're enjoying isn't something that was just by accident. We've been planning this for many years. We sat down at the grassroots level and met with the trace analysts from the LA Sheriff's Department and really thought this out about what would be the best plan of operation for us to get the maximum benefit from this opportunity. We have a mutual respect for one another and a real desire to make it work, and that's really key to this overall process. Because as far as I'm concerned, it just doesn't get any better than this. Thank you.
Questions for Doreen? I have a quick question.
Yeah. Okay.
Now that you've had about 2 years since the implementation of this field investigation unit, have you seen an increase in the number and the quality of the trace evidence cases coming into your section?
It's a good question. The increase was slight. It wasn't sharp, but it was slight, and I can't be completely confident that it's a direct result of that because we didn't actually contrast it to who the requesters were. And in the implementation of this, that would be our next step, and it's a really good question that you raise. We'll need to go into our files and see who the submitter is, because in our case management system, it is the submitting criminalist making the request on behalf of the crime scene and the criminal investigation. But thank you for asking. I'll have to follow up on that.
Thank you.
Yes?
Good afternoon. That was a good presentation. Thank you. In our laboratory, we're fairly challenged now with retirements, and we're finding what's happening now is as people retire and we replace them, there's a tendency to target train them in maybe glass and paint and not in everything. Is that happening in your facility?
Well, we started a few years ago and are still in the process of cross-training within our unit, within the trace unit, so that we have individuals cross-trained in most of the subdisciplines of trace evidence. We are not there 100%. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Sue, we're around 80%. We feel we're getting close, and it's our concern that when the anticipated retirement of one or two of those individuals occurs, that we won't be caught short without a backup to go from. But, like the rest of you, we're battling for resources with the DNA group. A lot of the effort and energy is heading in that direction. But we're also anticipating that as our DNA backlog decreases, we may have a really strong argument for redirecting some of that personnel, at least, towards crime scene investigation in order to, once again, kind of like begin with the end in mind, make sure that those DNA samples are being properly collected, and oh, by the way, while you're there, we need to make sure you're respecting and appreciating all the other physical evidence that's part of that crime scene.
Yes, I think it's a good motivation, your concept of your field units where you took a generalist and had them be part of the team. As a generalist, they really need to be experienced in all the areas of trace, and I think it's a good rationale for other laboratories to use that to go to their managers and say, this model is really good, but to provide this level of expertise, we need to train everyone in everything. So maybe we need to put a bit more money into a little increased staffing levels to get a better quality service.
I agree with you.
No other questions? Thank you, Doreen.
Thank you.